Hello, and welcome to the mentorDINO YouTube channel. I'm your host, Caitlin Roseer. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. Each week, I interview amazing professionals in and around the architecture, engineering, and construction industry to help foster learning, growth, and inspiration in others. Thank you all to our current subscribers, and if you're new, we'd love to have you join our community. So hit subscribe. It really does help others be able to discover this resource. So let's dive in. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the mentorDINO podcast. I would like to welcome Bob Bailey, architect and specifications and constructability specialist at IKM in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and my personal mentor. So I am really excited to have you on the podcast, Bob. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So to let everybody else know, I know we've had many discussions on your career journey and advice for me along my own career path. Would you mind kind of introducing yourself, letting everybody know a little bit about your experience, what education you got, and how you ended up more being a specifications writer as your career path?
I graduated from Carnegie Mellon, and last year was my 40th year in the profession. I'm a registered architect as well as a certified construction specifier. I made the decision to be a full-time specifier because it was kind of a matter of a happenstance, because I was at WTW at the time, and where my workspace was happened to be in proximity to their spec writer, Charles Brown. And he was an associate with the firm, and he was given the responsibility to find things for me to fill in my time, if I happened to be between project assignments. So that was in the days when, firms kept an extensive specifications library with catalogs and things, and suites catalogs and all that kind of stuff. And so he would periodically ask me to do like a little bit of research for him for the specs he was working on, and he kind of showed me what specifications were about, and would give me small assignments to work on, and I found that I liked that, and so I did more of it, kind of as a backup, and then sort of to supplement him, and I was also a project architect at that time, and then it got to the point where I was doing my own drawings and writing my own specs. But I was working on projects that I wasn't crazy about, and dealing with clients that and contractors that I just found frustrating. I did enjoy writing specifications. And by this time, Charles Brown had left the firm, and we had another spec writer, and he was only there. They went through a search to get this guy. He was only there for a year, and then he left. And I thought, well, they're not going to want to go through another protracted search to find a spec writer. And I thought, I like this enough to do it all the time. So I wrote this 4-page proposal and gave it to the principals and associates how I would do the job if I was the lead spec writer. And Tom Trebilcock came by and said, we've looked at your proposal, and he said, you're kind of young, but we'll give you a shot. And so I became WTW's lead spec writer at 29. I haven't regretted it, because I've always been in demand and I think well compensated. And I still enjoy writing specs. One of the things I like is that I get to work on a lot of different projects and don't have to spend extended amount of times on one job. I never really cared for that. That kind of gets boring to me after a while. So.
Do you have any advice on working with the different project teams to get the information you need? Has there been something that's worked better?
I kind of have to be, an amateur psychologist and kind of deal with the person the way they are. You don't have the same methodology for everyone because everyone's different in the way that they, handle information and convey it. That may seem to be, not true, but it is. And so there's really I don't think there's any set way to, approach getting project information. It's all about finding out what the project architect responds best to.
Yeah, well, it's the same with dealing with clients, or different project managers do things differently, or even a team kind of shifts its dynamics based on who's on it. So that makes sense. What do you enjoy most out of spec writing?
I like to write a spec section for something that no specification exists, or there's no guide spec for it, that I have to, kind of create it from scratch. I enjoy that. That tests my abilities to do everything right.
What's the weirdest thing you've had to specify?
Oh, there have been a few things along the way that have been odd. I'd have to give that one some thought.
Okay, if you think about it later.
My memory bank, because I'm in the hundreds of projects now.
Yeah, I know you specified something for me once, and I can't even remember what it was weird for. Like, I don't know if it was the multiple panels on Animal Friends or.
Well, dog kennels was kind of an unusual one. Don't do that very often. It's not weird. It's just not common.
Mm-hmm. And then asking reps, what can you pee on? That was my favorite part. You throw them off, and they're like, "What are you building?"
Yeah, I mean, as you know, when you do an animal facility, everything has to be able to be peed on.
Yep. I guess beside the people factor, is there a big challenge on being a spec writer?
I think so, and that's because I see a lot of people kind of, I guess I would say, fall short. It seems like a lot of architects think they can kind of gloss over specs, save it to the last minute, do it quickly. To a certain extent, you can get away with that if you're working on projects that aren't hard bid situations, and you have maybe you have a contractor you've worked with before, but when you get into institutional clients, that doesn't work real well. That's shortchanging the specs is a it's a good recipe to get a change order or 20
or 50. I've had specs definitely save my butt many of times, and you just don't learn about it in school, and so you don't even know.
Well, you don't
what to even look for in a spec. I remember going to you with the first job I was in CA, and I had to review submittals, and I'm like, I don't even know where this information exists. And you were able to show me kind of, specs are in 3 parts. Here's the information. Here's where this lives. Here's different other requirements. You need to make sure it hits. And I had absolutely no idea that that part even existed, because I was just learning the drawing side and just seeing how kind of everything comes together, but you're not taught it from the start.
And I get that all the time. Well, where would this be in specs? Not only in what division, but in what part of the specification section itself. To a certain extent, I'm kind of like a crutch, so people can, they just ask me rather than learn it themselves. But that's okay.
I can kind of learn it through you. I learned a lot through you. Spec writers are a big commodity within the AEC industry because not a lot of people specialize in specifying. What advice do you have for firms that may or may not have a formal spec writer in-house, or if they're learning to teach, because you started spec writing at a very young age? Do you have any recommendations for firms?
I think if you don't have a dedicated specifications professional, you at least ought to have an office strategy about how you go about it. You ought to have a good master guide system that you start working from, and not just continually copying from previous jobs, because things get updated in the spec world all the time, and you really want to keep current. Again, if you don't, it's another recipe for a change order. And then talk about the approach to the specifications, and who will typically do it on the project, and how they'll go about it. Is it going to be the project architect or the project manager? Or
yeah, because it can be a lot if you're putting ownership of drawings and specs on one person, because you still have all those owner meetings and contractor meetings that we kind of started out with. That can be a lot just to kind of keep up with the drawings. You don't want to leave the specs to last minute and miss something, or copy and paste and have the same issue from a previous job rear its head again because you're just copying and pasting. You didn't really mention it in your journey, but I know that you are a boomerang. So anybody who doesn't know what a boomerang is, so it kind of goes back and forth between 2 firms or multiple, depending on how many boomerangs you are. I know you boomeranged with WTW and IKM.
Yes, I'm a double boomerang.
Do you have any advice for changing firms, or how going back to a firm you work for in the past was?
As far as changing firms, I would say, don't be afraid of it. When I made the move from WTW to IKM, it was after 12 years, and inertia sets in, and it's a hard thing to fight, and you have anxiety about making a move, but as I try to tell young architects, I think having the perspective of working at more than one firm is valuable. No 2 firms do things quite the same way. And as an old colleague of mine once told me, he said, the grass is never greener, it's just a different shade. and that's true. Every firm has problems. You have to just decide which set of problems you can live with. As far as going back to a firm after you've been away for a while, what I found valuable was to do my homework and find out as much as I could about what the firm was like now. Kind of compare that to what it used to be, and again, see if I could live with that. Don't be shy about questioning the hell out of whoever it is you're talking to about going back. Ask Mike McDonald; he'll tell you I did that. We met 3 different times, and I
just grilling him.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes to the point of it's important not to burn bridges. I know it's more of a fun saying in Pittsburgh with all of our bridges.
That's true. It's too small of a community here, and no matter where you go, someone there has worked with somebody else, and so word gets around.
Yeah, and something I realized when I left IKM was like just being appreciative of the moment, because me leaving was a change, and so it was all these people will never all be in the firm at the same time again. Right. Because even if you were to go back, there are different people, different players, and different energy associated with it. And a number of people have come and gone. And so it's likely very different than the way I left it. Mm-hmm. So, but it's always weird. On the topic of the profession and firms are always constantly changing, do you have any advice for professionals starting to take on leadership roles or principal roles within their office?
Be sure that's what you want. When you get into those positions, and particularly the equity positions, there's a lot of responsibility there. And, let's face it, there's risk there. Bigger firms, you're worrying about tens or maybe even hundreds of, mouths to feed every month, when it comes payroll time. So it's a lot to weigh on your mind. Some people handle that better than others. Be sure that's what you want, because the higher you get, the more bucks stop at your desk.
Great advice, because I've definitely seen people shift and pivot after they kind of realize different situations of new roles. I know you are a huge mentor of mine. How has mentorship influenced your own career?
I had some good mentors early on and along the way, and one of them I'm still working with, Fred Watts. Has I'm still learning from Fred. So I was fortunate to have, I would say, good mentorship as far as the specifications community. The local chapter of the Construction Specifications Institute, CSI, I think was, a little stronger 35, 40 years ago than it is now. And we had some spec writers who there was a larger pool of spec writers, and so we had some in the group who were pretty experienced and had a lot to share. We used to do a review class for the certified specifier exam, and one of the spec writers kind of disdained the idea of putting up, slides and notes, and he just told anecdotes, but they were, they had a point, and there were good illustrations. So, as far as being a mentor, I don't think I really started doing that in earnest until I came back to WTW in 2012, and that was part of my mission when I came back, and that was, it was enjoyable. We had at that time we had a pretty good group of project architects, and part of what I did was just getting them to share among themselves, which proved to be valuable for everybody. So
just sharing like their experiences
and talking about it. Okay, so what do we do about it? Type of thing.
Yeah, so I guess more acknowledging difficulties on projects or lessons learned and being open about it rather than shameful, because some people can feel they don't want people to know they didn't do something correctly. But diving more into CSI, since you mentioned it, you've been very involved for a number of years. I know that was the first networking event I went to that you pulled me. I believe it was the CSI holiday party, and then I got to other events after that. Tell us a little bit more about that organization and the roles you've had.
Well, I started out with the Pittsburgh chapter because Charles Brown at WTW would give me the chapter newsletter, and I would read it. And one day I saw in there that the editor, who at the time happened to be Bill Wilson, who is now president of Specified Systems glazing contractors, Bill was looking for someone to write a column from an architectural point of view. And I like to write, so I said, I'll do it. Joined the chapter. And, Bill was pretty smart. He played that so that he could get out of the editor's role, and guess who got it?
Yep.
And so over the years, I've been editor of the newsletter 3 or 4 times, and that's presently what I do. But along the way, I've also been programs chair, and I participated in the educational courses that we put on. I've been chapter president, and a couple other committees. I haven't been treasurer or secretary, though, but I haven't really had a position at the regional level, although I've attended a number of region conferences over the year. And at the national level, I volunteered to help write new questions for the CCS exam a couple of years ago. So, and I've been to several national conventions over the years. I've been a member almost 40 years. So, yeah, I think, anybody who has an interest in specifications ought to join the organization.
And I would say even beyond specifications, I am not a spec writer, and I do enjoy going to CSI events, especially the holiday party, because it's a good way to talk to product reps that I have seen recently, haven't seen recently, what's new. It's fun to go to those and see everybody. And I wouldn't call it just like the spec writers of the city.
Well, it's good to have those contacts. CSI events are pretty good for networking. That's why a lot of people go.
Do you have any advice for anyone looking to get involved with their local CSI chapter?
Number one, I'd say do it, and number two, sometimes a good way to get more immersed in what the chapter is all about is to be on a committee.
Yeah, and actually do something and not just be a member.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes for any organization. If there's something you're passionate about, just to can always be a member somewhere. But if you're not putting in the effort to do other things, then you're not going to get as much out of it, if I'm making sense.
I've always felt that way. So.
And you can always learn new ways of doing the newsletter. I know I taught you InDesign, so then you can work a little bit more efficiently with the newsletter. Do you have any advice for others who are new to specifications or thinking about leading specifications for their project? Maybe not for their office yet, but want to tackle doing the specs?
I think I would definitely look into the CSI certifications, the CDT and the CCS. First one is Certified Documents Technologist, and then the second one is Certified Construction Specifier. One is the prerequisite to the other, but when you study for those, you find out the breadth of what you need to know as a spec writer. If your firm subscribes to a master guide system, I would say get into it and poke around and get familiar with it and kind of understand what those are all about.
Yeah, and so that would be more different programs like eSpec, or I interviewed Melody with Conspectus that has their own platform. Because I'm sure you started out with handwriting specs, moving to Word,
Yes.
and now using more cloud-based softwares to help in the process. How do you feel that growth has changed how you write specs?
I think you can do it quicker if you know what you're doing. If you don't, it can maybe give you a false sense that you do, because I think just about all the programs available now are smart systems. You can kind of pick and choose your way through those, and you may end up with something that you think is, correct or accurate, and you may have confusing choices in there, that sort of thing.
I remember you're helping me with specs this one time, and we were going through what's needed on a project. And you were just crossing out entire giant sections of the spec, and it was stressing me out. I'm like, I don't know. Can I delete that yet? That's where I like a little bit more of the online platforms that has kind of the history to if you want to bring something back or if something changes. But I remember you're like, nope, don't need any of this stuff. Cross everything out. And I'm like, I panicked like a few years out of school and not knowing what I'm doing.
Yeah, and that was probably me, going overboard. That's just so many years of experience, you just by looking, don't need that.
Yeah. Well, I even did that on drawings too. If it was, you have your standard door elevations or something, and you're doing a small project that you don't need 15 door elevations, you just need one or two. I would take that drafting view and I'd duplicate it, and I'd put the copy in the actual drawing set or leave a copy as an archive in case the project architect or PM was like, you did this all wrong, bring this back. So I like having copies. I can't remember what it was. But definitely crossing stuff out and in Word was definitely stressful, but, also didn't understand all the different language parts.
Well, the good thing with the system we use now is none of it goes away. It's all in there if you want to bring it back.
Do you think we'll ever move to not having printed out documents between drawings and specs?
Aren't we kind of there now?
For the most
I
part.
mean, does anybody print paper copies of specs anymore?
I think we always need that archive. I will say I've been in like job trailers where they have the printed set and they have the
No.
project manual, but it's off in the corner collecting dust and everybody's just on tablets checking and seeing what's
Yeah.
going on.
Well, I think some specs still say that, you have to keep a set of
So,
documents in the job trailer type of thing.
yeah. And I'm learning a lot with even the CDT exam that I thought it was a lot more spec heavy in terms of learning, but it's actually a lot more contracts and specs. So a little bit more of that, the general conditions up front, how the workflow goes, and how a whole project comes together, which I wish I knew earlier and should have taken this exam while studying for the AREs.
Well, I see that all the time, and I think that's a general weakness with architects is that they don't know or understand what's in the general conditions. And that document is used on the agreement on just about every project.
Yeah, and unless it's special for a particular owner,
it describes the roles of the parties to the contract and describes things that can happen as a result of the project and how that gets resolved.
yeah, and if you have any issues on the job site, it can be a guide plate for you there to know what was actually agreed upon and knowing you can look there for something.
And I'll get questions like, where does it say in the general conditions that such and such? And I'll say, it doesn't.
You haven't read it. You don't know where it is.
You may have seen that in an owner's supplementary conditions, which modifies the general conditions, but it's not in the general conditions.
When you QC documents, I have seen over the years that a lot of people will just do quality checks on the drawings and nobody ever opens up the specs to cross-check the specs. Do you have any advice on how that could be better integrated?
Should be looking at both. It's like I tell young architects who are attempting to do specs on their project. I said, make your spec notes as you're doing your drawings. Even the little stuff. If there's things you want a certain way, make a note of it. Specifications don't always have to be in spec language. Sometimes we have to, describe it in prose what we want. But the point is to build them both together, and so if you check one and don't check the other, that's kind of pointless. What would happen if you only looked at the specs?
Yeah, then there's glaring issues or things don't align and creates change orders, or they install one of them and that's not the one you wanted.
Now,
You discover it later.
I mentioned Fred Watts. He's our quality control guy, and he does both. And so he'll tell me, hey, we don't have a spec for this, or this is in conflict with the drawings type of thing.
Do you have any advice for the project architect leading the drawings and knowing when something should be in the drawings and when something should be in the specs instead?
A general division that says that the drawings show where it is and the size of it and how many, and the specifications, describe the quality and how to make it and install it type of thing. So, you generally want to stay away from calling out quantities in the spec. Unless, for instance, you're asking for something specific, and that maybe it's an accessory that goes with a marker board or something. You ask for two complete sets of markers, but that's something you could show in the drawings anyway. So.
Yeah, and you don't want to show it 20 times over in the drawings. It's easier to own that because you can just call them to like that marker board, and within that marker board they know they need to get these accessories with it. So makes sense. And I, like always, wrapping up my podcast with this final question, and it's, what advice do you have for young professionals just starting their career?
Know what you don't know, and don't be afraid to ask questions, even if you think they're dumb ones. That's something I've always told the younger people is try to understand what you don't know, and don't think you know it all, because there's so much to know in this profession that it's hard to get a grasp on most of it. And then, go to the experienced people for help. I think most of the time, they're not going to bite your head off.
No, that's definitely, it's hard because when I tell people you don't know what you don't know, then it can be scary to them because they're like, well, how do I know when I don't know something? And I think it's the questions, even if you think you know the answer or assume something, it's good to get a second check on it.
Yeah, it's dangerous to make assumptions in this profession.
Because most of the time you'll be wrong anyway, whether it's existing conditions or something's drawn or done a particular way from the user side or constructability. It's always good to make sure you ask the questions. Thank you so much, Bob, for taking the time to speak with me today. It is always fun talking to you, so I'm glad you're able to carve out an evening with me.
Well, thank you for having me, and I enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Check out the description below for any resources, links, and contact information we discussed. Did you like the conversation today? Is there something you'd like to know more about or a topic I should cover? Leave me a comment below and I will see what I can do to best answer your questions. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. It does really help others be able to find this resource to have larger conversations. So leave me a comment and subscribe. I really appreciate your support.